This incident happened not all that long ago, actually. I'm a 19-year-old female, and I obviously enjoy a night out with my friends. This particular night, a girlfriend and I had headed down to our local club/pub. We were dancing, drinking, and having a great time when I noticed it was around 2 a.m. or so. It was coming up on the closing time of 3 a.m. I noted we should probably think about heading out soon. If we waited until it actually closed, the wait for a taxi would be quite long, as everyone else would be looking for one as well. I let my friend in on my plans, and she insisted she wanted to stay. She then walked me out the front while I waited for a taxi. As we got to the top of the stairs, she saw me off at the door and headed back inside. I said goodbye to the bouncers, as I said it was a local place, and started walking over to the next taxi in the line. As I approached the taxi, I heard my friend call to me from behind. She still had my bank cards and money on her. Luckily, I walked back to the door to get them off of her, then said goodbye again. This time, as I turned to leave though, the bouncer stopped me. "Hey, you may want to take this second taxi in the line." Upon me questioning him, he didn't seem to have a reason behind this sudden advice and just insisted I trust him. I'm from Australia, and taxis usually wait in these lines. You have to take the next taxi as part of fairness. I explained to the bouncer that not only will taxi driver number 1 not be happy, but taxi number 2 may not even take my fare for this reason. Annoying, I know. Me being 19 and naive, I thought to myself, I only live around the corner. I have my phone as well. What's the worst that could happen, right? Well, obviously that was wrong. I took the first taxi in the line as I initially meant to. There were no immediate alarm bells. The man didn't seem any different than any other taxi driver. Not exactly polite, nor rude either. Just a normal guy. We were a few minutes into the fare, driving along the coastlines to my suburb, when all of a sudden, he pulled the taxi over to the side of the road and started walking around to my door. At this point, I was extremely confused as to what was going on. First, I thought maybe there was a flat tire or something, until he opened my door. I asked him what he was doing, and he replied to me, "We're going to the beach now." Alarm bells and red flags went off left, right, and center. I grabbed my phone and dialed 000 right away. I told him I was calling the police. I immediately saw him start to panic. He yelled at me not to be so silly and said he just wanted to spend some quality time with me. He reached for my arm and grabbed me to try to pull me out of the car. I pushed him away though, grabbed the door and slammed it closed. I waited to be connected. I've read quite a lot about people who are polite to creepers in these situations, but I was anything but at this point. I was soon connected with someone from emergency who asked me what my emergency was. I said I needed assistance right now and gave her the area where we were. She then proceeded to tell me I needed to call the police assistance line if it wasn't a true emergency. "Well, it's about to be if you don't get someone down here right now." She assured me a car was on the way and to get out of the car by myself. We were only a minute or two down the road from where we departed. Usually, there were at least 3 or 4 squad cars situated there, preparing for the end-of-night antics. Because of this, I knew I could have assistance in no time. While this was happening, the man was walking back to his driver's side, attempting to get back in. I don't know what he would have done if he'd gotten in with me in the car still, kicked me out or what, but I jumped out of the car as he got in, and he sped off without looking back. I kicked myself for not getting his taxi ID, which is something I'd usually do. I kicked myself even more for not just listening to the bouncer, who I see now obviously had a good reason for me to not get in this car. I rang my friend and asked her to stay on the phone with me. I told her I was still outside waiting for the taxi and had gotten bored. She offered to come and wait, but I insisted I was fine. Once the police came, they took me home and asked me what happened. They took a statement from me as well, but there wasn't much they could do, as I hadn't gotten any information on the taxi. The most I could provide was the driver's appearance and the company he worked for. I didn't tell anyone about the situation except for my then friend, who's now my boyfriend. He was shaken up by this. I hate thinking about what might have happened that night. and how lucky I am that it didn't. About 2 months on, my boyfriend, his housemate, and my sister arranged a cab to pick us up at my boyfriend's place and take us to the same venue this initially happened at. Guess which driver showed up? Yeah, that very same guy. I didn't say anything at the time to anyone because I knew it wouldn't have turned out well in the moment, but this time I made sure to get his ID and plate number and reported it to the police the very next day. Apparently, this wasn't even the first time he'd done something like this. It was the furthest he'd ever gotten, though. Most of the other complaints were similar. From what I know, the police made contact with the taxi company and informed them of the situation. I think he might have been let go after, but I'm not sure. I've definitely learned a lesson from this, though. I used to work as a haunted house technician at Busch Gardens in Williamsburg, Virginia. During the months of September and October, the park would put out an event called Howlo Scream. The park transformed into a massive Halloween-themed experience with multiple uniquely themed attractions, such as vampires, zombies, and clowns. The haunted house I worked at was called Fear Fair, which consisted of a maze that branched in between several buildings and tents. I was there to maintain the maze and fix anything that broke over the course of the night. Sometimes the guests would punch our spooky decorations out of fear, or trip over each other and knock over some of the lights or something. It kept me pretty busy. While the maze was open, I would normally just linger out of sight, making adjustments to the audio and checking in with my coworkers on my walkie-talkie. One Saturday evening, there was a heavy downpour, which deterred much of our potential business. I used the downtime to work on the wooden frame that served as the entrance to the maze. I placed a sign across the line entrance stating the maze was temporarily closed, and then I started to get to work. After a few minutes, I left to go pick up another tool, which I needed from the maintenance area. When I got back, though, I noticed someone strolling around, walking down the tunnel deeper into the maze. It was a young man, maybe in his late teens, with a dark complexion. He had long braids and was wearing a dark blue tank top. The only way in was past the sign that said it was closed, so I was really irritated. Not only because he was trespassing, but because I had disassembled the part of the wall to work on it, and if anything happened to tip over or fall, he could have easily been hurt. I called out to him, "Sir, we're not open yet. Did you need help with something?" Up until that point, his back had been turned to me. When I called out, he visibly jumped in surprise. I couldn't help but think, geez, he's already freaked out and nothing's even turned on yet. He gave me the strangest look, though, like he was sizing me up. For half a moment, I thought he was going to try something, but instead he responded, "No, I just thought you were open." I explained to him that Fear Fair would reopen shortly after I finished with my repairs. He nodded and walked past me back out the entrance, not making eye contact with me. I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt and assumed he was just an impatient or hot-headed guy, and really wanted to take a look at that maze. After I was done assembling the entryway, I took the sign down and started to prepare the maze once more. The scare actors arrived on time and took their positions, but there wasn't very much business that night. The grounds were all soaked from the rain, and we probably had more employees than guests wandering around the attraction. Shortly after 9 p.m., I was getting ready to close things up for the night. It looked like it was about to start raining again. And that's when one of the actors walked up to me and took me aside. "Hey, I didn't want to say anything over the radio, but there's this weird guy with braids in the back corner behind the maze. I don't recognize him, and I don't know why he's there either." I immediately remembered that trespasser from before. I made my way to the back corridor. I turned all the back lights on and poked around any place I suspected a given intruder would have enough room to hide. I even peeked out the back exit and shined my flashlight all around, but I couldn't find the man. I locked the back door and then walked back through the maze, instructing all the scare actors that they could now leave. I turned off all the fog machines and switched on the overhead lights so I could get a better look around. It wasn't unusual for some drunken guests to wander out of the boundaries, but if this was the same guy I had seen before, I was worried he might be waiting. Perhaps he was stalking one of the actors or something. It doesn't really calm your nerves wandering through an empty maze filled with horrific life-sized mannequins of demon clowns. Somehow, being silent in there made it even worse, because then you start to question whether or not the faint sounds you are hearing are from your own imagination. After another 15 minutes, I decided the maze must truly be empty and started shutting off everything behind me as I made my way back towards the entrance. Just as I had switched off another set of lights behind a hidden circuit board, I heard footsteps coming loud and fast from behind me. They were coming from across the way, making a beeline straight towards me. In response, I turned on my flashlight and shined it in the direction of those footsteps. I saw it was the same guy from before, charging right at me with a prop mallet in hand. When my flashlight beam hit his face, though, he slowed down for a moment, clearly blinded. I took that opportunity to book it out of there. I knew the maze way better than this guy did. I could navigate it well enough to keep well ahead of him. Sure enough, I heard him cursing and bumping into things in the dark behind me. Once I exited through the opening of the maze, I waved down the security guys who covered the entrance until the police arrived. The local police were always on call nearby in case a fight broke out or someone was injured. They went into the maze without hesitation and emerged a short 5 minutes later with the guy in cuffs. He had surrendered peacefully. It looked almost as though he was relieved the entire thing was over. The police informed me this kind of thing was actually pretty common as part of a local gang's initiation ritual. The new recruit must sneak into a park, find a weapon and place to hide, and record themselves knocking somebody out. Then leave the park through the front gate like any other customer. That mallet may have only been a prop, but it was still made of solid wood. Had he brought it down on my head hard enough, it would have knocked me out cold or even worse. Had he not been so obvious with his attack pattern, I would have never seen it coming. After they took him away, the police swept the entire park and found 2 more young men hidden and waiting for an opportunity to strike someone. None of this ever made the local news. I suspect the park didn't want that kind of publicity. Ever since then, I've made it mandatory that any employees wandering through the attractions travel in pairs. When I was 19 years old, I moved out of my parents' house and rented a little studio apartment by myself. At the time, I was going to school full-time and working at least 30 hours a week as well. I had a job in a small sub-sandwich shop. Because school was so expensive and I really needed the money, I agreed to work on Thanksgiving night. My family was a bit upset that I wouldn't be coming over, but they understood that I really needed this. I knew going into that workday that I would be by myself after 5 p.m. We didn't exactly expect the place to be packed and busy on the Thanksgiving holiday. I had worked there since I was 16, so I was trusted to close the store all by myself. Around the time that my last coworker left, the snow also began to start falling. So now, in addition to being slow due to being Thanksgiving, the snowfall was killing off any business we might have had. I decided to try and make the best of it though. I went and grabbed my astronomy textbook out of my bag and tried to spend some time reading and studying. I wasn't aware of how much time had passed before I finally noticed someone outside the shop. By this time, the snow was falling so hard that there was no visibility at all beyond a foot or two in front of you. I could still see the silhouette of a man. He came into the foyer and began shaking the snow off his body. I put my book to one side and went over to the counter. I put my gloves on and the guy walked in further. I felt uncomfortable right away. Not just because I was alone though. It wasn't the first time I had ever been in the store by myself with a customer. There was just something about this guy though. He just had a weird air about him that made me feel very uneasy. He kept on glancing around the place like he was extremely nervous for some reason. He was also a pretty big guy. He was wearing a jean jacket in the middle of a snowstorm, which was quite odd as well. He walked up to the counter and began looking around. When I asked him if I could help him, he looked amused. "I guess you must be one of the lower employees," he commented. Confused, I asked him what I meant. "Well, I figure it's the lower employees they force to work on Thanksgiving," he said. "New people, maybe no family to go home to." I forced a weak smile. "I do indeed have a family to go home to," I assured him. "I'm just working late because I need the money." "That's too bad," the man responded. When I asked why he said that, he then responded with this: "Because your family's Thanksgiving is gonna be ruined when they find your body in the dumpster out back." If you've never had someone threaten your life out of the blue, I can't even tell you what it felt like. It was what I would imagine being hit by a lightning bolt would feel like. He said that with a smile on his face, but the look in his eye indicated he was not joking at all. I looked over at the phone on the wall by the register. When I did, he shifted to the side, indicating he would get to me before I even dialed a single number. Though I was scared to death, I suddenly made the smartest decision I ever made. I was still behind the sandwich counter, so I grabbed the knife and threw it at the guy. This clearly surprised him, and while he was falling backward off balance, I turned and ran back to the manager's office. I slammed and locked the door. He hopped over the counter in a matter of seconds and tried to force the door open. It was impossible though. The store safe was kept in that room, so there were no windows and the door was quite heavy. I grabbed the phone on the desk and called the police right away. By the time they got there though, the guy was obviously long gone. I'll never forget the look on his face and the sound in his voice when he mentioned my family finding my dead body in a dumpster. My story starts in 2014, when I was 10 years old. I had just made a Gmail account, and it made me feel really grown up and mature. I'm thankful I didn't pick something stupid for the address, because I still use it to this day. With my Gmail account, I created a blog, on which I posted book reviews and recommendations. I was kind of a nerd when I was younger. I gave all my classmates the link to my new blog, and I knew every single person that engaged on it because their usernames were all some variation of their real name. One day, however, I received a comment on a post I made by a username I didn't recognize, PinkyPie_. They left very normal comments on my posts. I thought maybe it was also one of my classmates who decided to try out a different username. Honestly, it was a small incident, and I didn't really give it too much thought. Then, about 2 years later in 2016, I made a Roblox YouTube channel, which I've long since deleted. Cringy, I know. I would record gameplay and post it onto my channel. I gained a whopping 18 subscribers or something, I think. One of those subscribers, though, the one that commented regularly on many of my videos, was called PinkyPie_. This kind of freaked me out, because I had made a completely new Gmail for this channel, and I had not told anyone about it. Roblox used to be my guilty pleasure, so I kept my channel a secret. I kept brushing off random appearances by this person, commenting on my videos, my blog, my friends' YouTube channels, even my mom's Facebook once, as coincidences. That was until 2019. I was either 14 or 15 when I made my first Reddit account. This was when I was in my K-pop era. I was a regular on r/K-pop and made news-like posts about happenings in the K-pop world. One day, I made a post like usual when I noted that one of the comments was from a user named Pinkie_Pie_. The comment was a fairly mundane, typical Reddit thing, so nobody really questioned it or did anything about it, since it was relevant to what my post was talking about. I clearly remember feeling unnerved though, because this person had been showing up on every single social media account I ever created, ever since my very first email account. At this point, I reported that account and deleted my own Reddit. I still kept tabs on that account though. Now we jump to 2020. I was 16 years old and the pandemic had just started. At this time, I was kind of emo, angsty, and insecure, as most people are at least once in their lives. I had not made a TikTok account even though it was all the rage because of literally only one thing: fear of that person finding me once again. It was at this time I discovered 4chan, NSFW warning by the way. 4chan's complete anonymity and my strongest weapon, the Opera browser and its VPN, led me to believe I was 100% safe and protected, even if I was on a website that was basically full of the devil's spawn. I posted normal things mostly. Sometimes I would explore the NSFW side though, and mostly enjoyed talking to strangers on the internet. One day, I was feeling especially brave and horny, so I took 3 to 4 nudes of myself and posted one of them on /B. The post rose to the top because I mentioned I was Asian in the title, which I am, and obviously those guys went crazy over that. I lied about my real age and said I was 18. I shouldn't have done that, and I don't really know what I was thinking. I remember receiving between 400 to 500 replies on my thread. Not all of them were nice, but still, I got a lot of compliments, which really satisfied my ego and made me feel a little better about myself. As I was lurking over my thread though and reading these various comments, I noticed a comment from somebody named Pinkie_Pie_. It was another generic comment related to the situation, but this one did not make me feel admired or appreciated. It made me feel sick to my stomach. That was my breaking point. I deleted that thread immediately, then went into a sort of paranoid delusional state. I deleted all of my social media accounts, powered off my phone, shut down my computer, and disconnected the Wi-Fi. I honestly felt like I was going insane. How could this person possibly be showing up literally everywhere I went online? By that time, it had been around 6 years since they'd first showed up. For a couple of years after, I took a break from every type of social media entirely. I got rid of my Instagram, my Snapchat, my Reddit, YouTube. I scanned through everything and made sure it was gone. If I wanted to go on a social media site, I would do it on a VPN and without signing in. This gave me a much-needed break from that person's account. I never did delete my Gmail since I used it for a lot of things though. What's odd is that while this guy had found me on every social media site I used, they never once directly tried to email me. I was 100% sure they must have had my email. For some reason, they just didn't choose to try to contact me. Finally, we get to 2023 and to the present times. Sometime in early January, I decided to make a Reddit account again and mostly just lurk. I posted and commented very little, and I received no comments from Pinkie_Pie_. I believe the ordeal was finally over. In November, a few days before my 19th birthday, I went to Japan for my cousin's wedding. I decided to make a Reddit post on r/outfits of my wedding outfit because I really liked it and wanted people to see it. Guess who commented on it immediately? Well, to be honest, I don't know who it was. By the time I read the comment, the account that had written it had been deleted. What they wrote, though, is what shocked me. How is it in Japan, by the way? Liking it more than name of city where I lived? Name of the state where I live, USA? Once again, I was in hysterics. I was 99% sure it was the same guy. Somebody, even if it wasn't who I thought it was though, had somehow just doxed me on the internet. I reported the comment and the user, and once again deleted my post and my account. All I could really do was run. I really need to get this off my chest. I haven't really told a single soul. I feel unsafe all the time, and have paranoia-induced hallucinations occasionally. I can't explain to anyone why though. I had this really weird experience that haunts me to this day. I had a great uncle who was around 80 years old. At the time, his wife had passed away a few months earlier. They had been together since they were in high school, so he was of course very devastated by the sudden loss. It's hard to say that my uncle withdrew from the world because he was already sort of withdrawn. He lived out in the hills in this beautiful old house he had built by himself. He was very handy and very rarely came down off the hill for any reason, at least after my aunt passed away. He spent about 5 months without even driving down into town or contacting anyone. My family was very concerned about him. My mother told me that when she went to see him, he specifically asked if I could come and stay with him for a while. I always enjoyed spending time with my uncle, so I readily agreed to the drive. His house was a long ways away. When I say he lived way out in the hills, he was really way far out there. I got to his house eventually though, and went in to see him. I was shocked to see just how much the man had aged. Not only that, but he also acted much differently now. He was extremely paranoid and refused to be left alone in the house. Literally, when he was ready to go to sleep, he would beg me to stay in the room with him. He was afraid to be alone. This was a big surprise to me because I had never known this man to be scared in his entire life. My uncle told me that ever since his wife had passed away though, he'd been seeing a man dressed in black. The man would usually wait outside the house. He would always step out from behind a tree for a moment. Then, as soon as my uncle spotted him, he would move away again. He even told me that once or twice, he'd caught the man watching him through one of his windows, but whenever the man was caught watching, he would step away. Obviously, I thought my uncle was just losing it. He was understandably distraught about losing his wife, and clearly the stress was making him see things. However, whether the problem was real or not, I was more than willing to stay with him to make him feel better. About 2 weeks after I'd arrived, my uncle was in bed. I'd come into the room with him and waited on the chair while he slept. I decided I really needed to get up and stretch my legs a bit in that moment. My uncle was a really deep sleeper anyway, so the chances of him waking up at all and noticing I was gone were pretty damn slim. I got up and went to the kitchen. I decided to work quickly on making myself something to eat. While I was just finishing cooking something though, I suddenly heard this horrendous noise coming from my uncle's room. At first, it sounded like a scream, accompanied by a loud shattering sound. Completely freaked out, I dropped my food and sprinted to my uncle's bedroom as fast as I could. I'll never get the image of what I saw that night out of my head. My uncle was still laying down in bed, as white as a sheet. His eyes were open wide, and for a moment I almost thought he was dead. That's how still he was being. Even stranger still, though, was what he was staring at. He was staring at the window facing his bed. As I observed closer, I saw it had been completely shattered. There was glass all over the floor, and it was very evident that whatever destroyed this window had done so from the outside. I checked around the outside and inside of the house. I not only found nothing, I found no trace of anything being there at all. My uncle was terrified to be alone while I was checking the premises, but there was nothing I could do about it. I had to make sure no one was there still. After a thorough check, I still found nothing. I hated to do this to him, but I had to take my uncle off that hill. He was so scared, but whatever had happened to him made it even worse. I took him to the hospital to check up, but unfortunately his mental state had deteriorated from the attack so badly that he wouldn't be allowed to go back to the house. My mom arranged for him to be put into a home, and I repaired the damage to the window. Nothing was stolen when I got back. I stayed there for a while, but I never saw the man my uncle talked about. And no further vandalism ever happened there again. I have no idea what that was about, but it seemed to be targeting my uncle for some reason. I work at a bar in a suburb of Melbourne that is safe during the day but has become sort of notorious for a high rate of abductions during the nighttime, specifically along the main street that my work is on. I often work night shifts or late shifts even. Tonight, I even finished at 11 p.m. for some context. I'm an uppity 19-year-old girl. I got out of work at 11 p.m. and started to walk down the street. It's quite well lit in some parts, but extremely dark in others. I began looking to hail a taxi. I was having no luck in finding one though. In fact, there were very few cars about at this time, which was quite unusual actually. I looked across the road, only to see a man with a hoodie on that was concealing almost all of his face. From the parts that I could see, he looked somewhat young, maybe early to mid-20s, and seemed to be high on something. Quite a shady figure to me. I noted he was pretty tall as well. I guess I'd been looking at him for too long though, because he immediately crossed the street towards me, and I stopped looking at him. I started to walk faster, looking behind me to keep an eye on his distance, and now even more desperate to hop in a taxi. When I turned around to look at him once again, to my relief, he was walking down a side street. I stepped out onto the street to get a better view down the road when he came back around from that side street he'd just entered. My stomach dropped as I saw he now had 2 more people accompanying him. I started to walk really fast now, and they began to walk after me. I was going as fast as I could without jogging and was getting really panicked, thinking of hailing down just any car to ask someone for help. The 3 men were quickly gaining on me and were all screaming and shouting at me. My anxiety had started to sink in though, and I couldn't hear a word that they said. It was all only white noise basically. A taxi with its lights off drove past, and I ran out into the middle of the road. The driver stopped and said he was finished for the day and wasn't taking any more customers. I told him I was being followed and asked if I could sit in his car for a second just to feel safe. He let me into his taxi, drove 20 meters away, and told me to get out. The men were still there, though. I begged him to take me out of sight at least a little further down the road. When he noticed how genuinely scared I was at that moment, I guess he got concerned and adopted a more fatherly tone. The taxi driver was actually extremely kind afterward and refused to let me get out of his car until he found me another taxi to get me home safely. He drove around with me for a few minutes until we found another empty one. He beeped the other cab down and explained the situation to him. I thanked both drivers profusely, and we swapped cars without incident. The next driver was also incredibly nice as well. He said he had a young daughter at home and got quite upset and angry, thinking about how people can take away your right to feel safe. I'm extremely thankful they were there to help me out that night. I don't know what would have happened if they weren't. Everyone always tells me it's okay, that I'm being too dramatic, that they're not really bad people, they're just drunk. But parties with my family really ruined my childhood. My parents, especially my mother, really liked partying, seeing friends, getting drunk, and the whole package. Nothing special. Yeah, sure, everyone loves having a little fun sometimes, and I can fully understand that. Since I was little though, my mother always had a really close friend. He'd be around 55 now, I guess. He would always come home with his wife and they'd drink a whole lot. Sometimes he'd even do so much his wife would even be ashamed of him. He would get that bad. When all the family was wasted, my mom forced me to join in with them. We're having fun. Come on, don't ruin the party. You're a pain in the ass, always complaining. What's the problem now? I was the one parenting all of them. I was protecting the dog because they would throw their empty bottles at her. They would pour beer in her bowl and make her drink it. I was warning them over and over because they were getting way too rowdy and drinking way too much. I basically had to babysit them all every time, even though I was only around 11 or 12 years old. One day, I was filming and having fun with my mom's friend. We were having a genuinely nice moment, to be honest. It was just me and him, and we were dancing. So far, there wasn't really anything weird in this situation. Then he stopped me though, and started to say things that scared me real bad. You know I could be your father, right? You're so young. Oh, do you remember when you were a child, and you said I was your lover? You said you were in love with me. I didn't know what to say. I felt terribly uncomfortable. He grabbed my butt and whispered in my ear. Oh, you say nothing when I do that, huh? That's not good. Then he just kept on dancing like nothing happened. I did get a recording of this, but I deleted it. I felt too ashamed in that moment. I was feeling stressed, ashamed, bad, scared. I wasn't hiding it either. My mom's friend sent me a message right after this. Are you mad at me? I felt intimidated. No, don't worry. I was about ready to just go to sleep. I told everyone goodbye when that fucking friend grabbed my head and tried to kiss me on the lips. After that, he would stare at me all day long. It was a nightmare. I didn't say anything. I waited for 2 years before speaking up. The first person I told was my dad. He looked desperate and sad, and then he just walked away without doing anything. I tried to tell my mom too. At first, I lied and said this had all happened to my best friend. She gave me the whole, he should tell his parents. That's awful. I hope he's doing better now. When I finally told her it happened to me, though, she changed her mind immediately. What? He did that? He was drunk. He didn't mean to do that. Maybe he just touched your hair. Don't tell me he did that to you. He's my best friend. It was 2 years ago. I mean, he won't remember. Come on, it's nothing. I cried. I just couldn't deal with this anymore. Every time I tried to tell anyone something, I would never be taken seriously. Especially by my family. That's why I stopped telling them altogether and started to avoid them ever since. Maybe they're right, I don't know, but that's not the only thing that's happened since then. I can't even sit next to them during a party. I can't even look at them, simply because I'm so scared. I was only a child back then. My husband and I were stopping over in New York before heading to our temporary home of Poland. We had been living there for about a year or so and are originally from Australia. We'd spent the past year traveling throughout some of the more shady parts of Europe, so we thought we were generally prepared for any weird incidents that might occur. We were tired as we walked through JFK, ignoring everyone who wanted us to take their special taxi or whatever. We went outside and waited in the line with all the other irritated travelers. When it was our turn, the taxi driver got out and left. Another guy came and took our bags. The motor was still running even. I didn't really think anything of it, and didn't really care at that point. When I insisted I take my own bag, and tried to open the trunk though, the man suddenly snapped at me. I was startled and said it was okay. I'd just sit with it on my lap instead. My husband and I traveled light, so we only had one suitcase between us. Can you open the trunk? My husband asked the guy. Otherwise, there's going to be no room for us. The guy already looked pissed, and all we were asking was for him to do his job. I was already looking around for another cab, because I couldn't be bothered. Fine, the guy snapped. He basically ripped the trunk open. I hadn't even gotten into the car yet. It was kind of a paranoid thing that I never got into the taxi alone, as a result of some kidnapping stories in Greece of a similar nature. I waited, and then I saw what was in the trunk as the man quickly tried to close it once more. It wasn't all over the flooring or anything. just on one side, but it instantly made me feel ill. I could see what looked a lot like blood. The spot was visibly wet, and I stared at it blankly. Even with the dim light, I could just about make out various other stains of similar darker colors. I had barely begun to process what I'd seen before he slipped my suitcase in and the trunk door was slammed. I was now wide awake and did not want to get in this taxi. Everything was wrong, and this was clearly a mistake. "Come on, what's the holdup? Get in!" the taxi stand dude urged us, as equally pissed-off passengers behind us were waiting for their own rides. I tried to get my husband's attention, but he was already in the back seat. If this were a horror movie and I was watching, I would be screaming at the screen, "Don't get in that cab!" I got in the taxi anyway, with my bag on my lap. I clutched it as we spun around the corners, went forward sharply, and had brakes slamming constantly. I felt sick and couldn't stop thinking about what I'd just seen. Was that real? Halfway through my haze, though, I realized we were not going the right way. I mean, far be it for me to tell taxi drivers in their own city where the hell they're going. I like to be prepared, though, and I like to know where I am. If we're not taking the tourist scenic route where they charge you a lot of dough, this guy was clearly going the wrong way. "Hey, where are you going?" The words just fell out of my mouth. The man didn't say anything, though. He didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't even respond. "What?" My husband asked me if we were really going the wrong way. I shouted that we were. My husband, not one to take this from anyone, then turned to the man. "Hey man, don't think you can screw with us. We're not paying more than we agreed upon, so stop bringing it around and take us where we're going, or I'm gonna call the cops." He had no idea why I was freaking out, though. I didn't care about the extra money. I thought we were just a pawn in whatever this guy's master plan was. We were going to be swimming with the fishes in the Hudson or something. I was going crazy. My mind was wandering. Maybe that actually was blood in the trunk. This guy was going to kill us with his driving either way. Maybe some plans for later in some warehouse with all his serial killer friends or something. The driver immediately slammed on the brakes at a set of lights. "I'm pretty sure this is not a real taxi," I muttered to myself. The cab driver immediately spoke up. "Do you see the sign up there? It's a taxi, you moron," he snapped. "Well then do your job," my husband snapped back at him without a second thought. Perhaps the guy thought this was too much trouble when loudmouth Ozzy Bogan and his crazy wife started snapping at him, because the driver suddenly turned around and we were going the right way to get to the hotel now. I made sure to check the trunk again when we got out, but it was much darker now, and I couldn't see anything clearly, except for a lot of shredded rags for some reason, with a deep rust color staining them all. I had to attend a family reunion a few years ago. Unfortunately, I really didn't have the money to fly, nor the money to stay in a hotel on the way there. Because of this, my plan was to drive the entire way and sleep at rest areas in my car. It made sense to me. It would ensure that I would be able to visit my relatives on this 3-day trip. I would be sleeping in the car for at least 2 nights. I brought along some pillows and blankets, so I could curl up in the back seat. The first night came and went without incident. I found a rest area and was able to just hang out in the parking lot. The second day of driving, however, had me going through the mountains. I had never made this trip before, so I wasn't sure if I would even find a rest area on the way. I drove for a very long time, and when my eyes were beginning to close by themselves, I figured I would have to pull out on the side of the road to get a little rest. It was obviously much harder to go to sleep this time, but at least it was quiet and dark. Very few cars actually came across that road. I'm not sure how long I'd been asleep before I felt something wake me up. I thought I felt my car moving a bit. Then I assumed it was probably just something I'd felt when I was sleeping. I closed my eyes, and then I felt it again. My car bobbed up and down a bit. I was afraid, peeking out from under the blankets. I caught sight of someone standing at the front of my car. He had his foot resting on the bumper, and he was pushing it down with his foot, causing my car to bob a bit. I was about to hide back under the blankets when I looked to the side window. I saw a second person there, peeking inside. I jumped up, and when I did, I saw the first guy leave the front of the car and come around to the side window where I was. He began slamming on my door and trying to open it. Fortunately, it was already locked. They started banging on my windows. I was completely freaked out at this point. I decided the best thing to do would be getting to the front seat and to drive off. Right before I started the car though, the first guy succeeded in breaking in my window. I yelled and quickly pulled away. I have no clue why those guys were antagonizing me, but I did not stop driving until I got to the reunion. And obviously, I never slept outside at night again. My first job was at McDonald's. This building was attached to a gas station and located just off a busy highway. I was 14 and had all kinds of bad luck at this age. I started a 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift. This early, the store was usually empty, so only 3 people, myself included, were in the restaurant. The manager, who was in the back, and the cook, who was also in the back. I, the cashier, was up front. I was wiping down the counter when a man who looked to be in his mid-30s or early 40s came in. He didn't order anything though. Instead, he went straight to the restrooms, which were in the restaurant area just around the corner from my cash. Many truckers and travelers would come in simply to use the washrooms and leave, so this was not too uncommon an occurrence. I didn't really think much of it. After the man finished though, he walked up to the counter and said this. Excuse me, I was just in the washroom and one of the toilets is overflowing. I immediately came around the counter and let him lead me toward the restroom. Suddenly though, I got this terrible feeling in the pit of my stomach and stopped dead in my tracks. I became very aware that no one was in the restaurant area, and the only other 2 people in the store were in the back. They would not be able to hear me if I went into the restroom. The man had the restroom door propped open and realized I had paused. "Come on in, I'll show ya." It came off innocently enough, but something was not sitting well with me. I smiled at him and said, "One moment, I'll get my manager." I started making my way back to the counter. "Come on, it'll only take a minute," he called out behind me. I met my manager in the back still and explained to him that a man was complaining about an overflowing toilet. My manager went to check it out, and I followed closely behind him. When we turned the corner though, the man was gone. We entered the restroom, and no such toilet was overflowing. We exchanged a look and never brought it up again. To this day, I feel like some divine intervention must have given me the wisdom to know not to follow that man into the restroom. The whole situation only lasted a few seconds, but it felt like forever. I was young and trusting, and this man could have done God knows what, and I wouldn't have been heard. He could have left and got away with whatever he had planned, and hit the highway right away. I never did see the man again after. I'm a 13-year-old male who currently lives in London, England. The story happened a few days ago, so it's quite fresh in my mind. My journey to school every day consists of a 30-minute bus ride and a 10-minute walk. It seemed like the days were getting darker and darker, so normally I like to walk with my friends to school. That day I was only with one friend though. Let's call him Kyle. Our walk to school consists of an alleyway, which after 10 minutes leads into a small wooded area with a path. It's a kind of strange little path, considering the moment you're out of it, it's just houses and a school. The path never really bothered me though, until this day. All of my other friends wanted to go to the store across from the start of the alley, so it was just me and Kyle. We began our journey that morning, and after about 2 minutes in, we saw a man standing next to a car on the right side of us. The window of the car was open, and the man seemed to have his hand in the car. Kyle whispered to me, "Is he trying to steal that thing?" I looked back to the man, and we immediately locked eyes. Kyle and I began to walk a little faster until we reached the wooded area. We felt a little better now and decided to slow down. That is, until we heard the sound of a twig snapping behind us. Now, I'm already a very paranoid person, so I have very quick reflexes. Almost instantly, I turned a full 360 around me to see what was making that noise. I couldn't see anything though. As I began to look a little more closely, I saw a figure moving from behind a tree. Kyle didn't really seem to care though, as he'd continued walking in the meantime. I caught up pretty quick, and I asked him, "Did you see that guy?" Kyle said, "What guy?" I brushed it off. Maybe I'd just seen shadows or something. We continued to walk onward until I felt a cold, uneasy feeling. I turned to check once again, but I didn't see anything. I couldn't stop observing though. I was looking around closely once again when I see a figure crouched down behind a bush. My parents have always warned me about stranger danger, so I immediately bolted. Kyle didn't have any idea what was going on, but he quickly followed me anyway. Stupidly, we went off the regular path. We started just running rapidly around in the woods. I grabbed up my phone, only to realize I'd forgotten to charge it the night before. I asked Kyle to take out his, but he'd left it at home apparently because it was broken. We heard footsteps behind us getting closer. I quickly looked around to a few bushes around us and picked one to hide in. I prayed to God as we jumped into it. Kyle looked to be on the verge of tears. We heard the sound of a phone ringing, and I heard someone pick it up and start talking. What I heard them say gives me chills to this day. "Why are you calling me right now? I've got exactly what you're looking for. Just meet me in the woods by such and such." Then he hung up. It took about 3 seconds for me to realize the reality of this situation. The footsteps got closer and closer. I closed my eyes, but then I heard it. "Hey, what are you doing?" I heard a voice call out, and twigs and leaves snapping and crunching rapidly. I looked up to see an older kid from school standing in front of us. I saw a man running away at a fast pace. I don't know what would have happened to Kyle and myself if this older kid hadn't followed us. I feel I learned a valuable lesson, though, to always be prepared for the worst. Now this happened a very long time ago. It was in 1976. To indicate how disturbing it was for me, it's taken me this long to really talk about it. My best friend in high school was a guy named Bryant. When we graduated, we ended up going to different colleges, so we didn't get to see each other that much. Communication in the 70s wasn't quite as easy as it is nowadays. There was no email, and expensive long-distance communication meant we could only really communicate with postcards or letters. We had an agreement, though, that in the beginning of every single summer vacation, the two of us would go camping together for a week. I won't mention where we went camping. Just know that it was in a large forested area. We had a map, of course, and we tried to see how far we could go in our half a week before turning and making it back. We slept in different tents. The morning after the third night of hiking, Bryant told me he hadn't slept all that great. He said he kept hearing a rustling sound in the leaves outside his tent. He actually thought there was a human being out there, walking around our camping area. I didn't really believe him, though. I told him it was probably just an animal. I couldn't think of any reason why a person would be circling our camp in the middle of the night, out this far into the wilderness. The following morning, Bryant once again looked like he hadn't slept very much at all. When I asked him, he told me he'd again heard the same rustling around our camp as he had the night before. He insisted again it really was a person. I wasn't really sure what I could tell him. I mean, if it was a person, there wasn't a whole lot we could do about it. We were already beginning to head back anyway, so I couldn't just say, hey, let's turn around right now and leave. We were already in the middle of doing that. The next night, usually I would fall asleep pretty quickly. However, I decided I would try and stay up to see if I could hear what Bryant had been hearing. I tried to stay up, but I kept feeling my eyes trying to close up on their own. I kept catching myself and jerking my head up to stay awake. I think it was when I was just beginning to drift off that something fully pulled me out of my sleep. There was some noise, some rustling coming from around the camp. That immediately woke me up. I listened in closely. Bryant really had been right. It sounded like someone was circling our camp. I mean, I had no way of knowing if it was a person instead of an animal, as Bryant had claimed. But I guess I didn't know why an animal would be circling us all night for days, rather than actually doing something. Needless to say, I did not sleep very well that night either. Eventually, I pulled it off though. When I got up, I noticed that Bryant hadn't gotten up yet. I decided to let him sleep for a while longer. He likely needed any sleep he could get. However, when an hour passed by and he still hadn't gotten up, I decided to wake him up myself. I called out his name, but there was no answer. I knocked on his tent, which is quite the funny thing to say, I admit. Still no answer. I called out louder, but there was no response. I never would have opened his tent without his permission, but now I was quite worried. I opened the tent to wake him up, but I saw he wasn't there. I was still a bit worried, but now I figured he'd probably just woken up early and went out on his own. Another hour passed by though, and he still didn't come back. I kept calling out for him, but he never responded. I combed the area, and I couldn't find him at all. I can't begin to describe you how difficult this situation was. I waffled over just looking for him by myself or booking it to a ranger station. When I'd spent a significant amount of time trying to find him, and failing, I finally went to a ranger station. A search was organized. The search had no better luck than I had, though. They didn't find a single trace of him. That was 41 years ago, and I haven't seen nor heard hide or hair of him since that day. They never found a body, living or dead, but I never saw my best friend again. I have no idea what really happened to him, but my view was pretty much that whatever happened to my buddy, it had something to do with whoever was circling our tents in the night. Recently, I had to make a quick run to Walmart after work for a few smaller items I'd forgotten the day before. About halfway through my trip, I was approached by a woman and a young girl who asked me to buy a pack of diapers for them. Now, I do enjoy helping people out however I can, but something felt incredibly off-putting about this situation. Something about the way she just strode right up to me and asked, almost as if it was very rehearsed. I told her I couldn't do so in the most polite way I could muster. She nodded and went on her own way. I was prepared to deal with potentially having turned away a woman who was genuinely in need of help. But like I mentioned, something still felt very weird about it. I completed the rest of my shopping and was well on my way to just forgetting the entire encounter. When I made my way up to the self-checkout though, suddenly the same lady and little girl appeared out of nowhere and made a beeline right for me. She didn't look at me or speak. She and the girl just started scanning not only the diapers but also items they had hidden in their clothes, racking up a huge total on the self-checkout. I was completely stupefied that she just brazenly assumed I'd pay for all of this. I got the attention of an associate nearby and quietly explained the situation. I wasn't trying to make a scene, but I simply didn't know these people, and I was not about to pay for so many of their belongings. Especially now that I knew it was all a ploy. He told me they'd had to deal with her before, and I wasn't the first customer she'd had a run-in with. He put on his most patient customer service voice and talked to the woman, at which point she pretended not to speak any English, despite having had a pretty firm grasp on it earlier when asking me to buy things for them. She kept pointing at me as if to indicate she and the girl were with me. Thankfully, she wasn't fooling the associate though, who by now had not only cleared her items from my checkout, but also placed himself between me and the woman. She was still pretending she couldn't understand him, and still adamant that we were together. She was getting louder, and things were starting to really escalate now. I made it a point to swiftly pay for my belongings, and hightailed it out of there. I hurried out to my car, closing the door just in time to see the little girl sprinting to catch up with me, the woman not far behind her. Panic set in, and suddenly I was trying to lock the doors, throw my groceries in, and buckle up all at once. The woman arrived and began frantically pounding on my window as I cranked the car, with what I assumed at first was her fist. It wasn't until I got a good look that I caught the sun gleaming off of something. I turned to find that she was hitting it with the tip of a switchblade, making deliberate slicing motions with it. Just about the only thing I could think to do was throw my car into reverse and get the hell out of there. As I did, she and the girl slowly walked in front of my car and started heading back toward the store. As she was walking by, though, the woman turned around and gave me what I can only describe as the most sinister smile I've ever seen. Something was deeply insidious about the way she gave me this knowing look, a truly diabolical version of the kind of look a mischievous kid would give you when they know they're doing something they're not supposed to. I was shaken, but ultimately okay in the end, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't look over my shoulder for a long while after. I was living in a flat share on the outskirts of a city, which is known for generally being very safe. A key is needed to enter the main building, but often the door isn't shut properly, and so doesn't lock. Not really a cause for concern for anyone in the building, as it's a very trusting neighborhood. It was around 2 a.m. or so, and I was laying in bed naked, completely sprawled out. At some point, someone opened my door and entered. I figured it was one of my flatmates going to the balcony. He would have to walk through my room to access it, so it was completely normal that someone might come in at this time of night. I had just smoked a spliff and it was 2 a.m., so I opted to ignore this person and pretend to be asleep. I could feel him just standing there, though, and I thought that maybe he was waiting for his girlfriend to join him or something, and maybe he was stood there checking his phone. No big deal. The person went out to the balcony. Took about 2 or 3 minutes. I figured it was definitely him. They were out there smoking a cigarette. They came back in and went back to standing there in total silence. I was half asleep though and didn't really think anything of it. The next morning, my flatmate told me that someone had broken in, came into my room, and went into the room of my flatmate as well. They'd gone through all of his things and gone out into the kitchen. Upon seeing my flatmate wake up from all the noise and come out to see what was going on, they quickly fled from the building. The only thing the person stole was my pair of Marshall headphones. We were all very confused as to why they only stole my headphones, as opposed to the money left on the table, or my flatmate's multiple cameras, for example. We spoke to our neighbors, of which there are around 15 in the building, and none of them had noticed anything out of the ordinary. They hadn't gone into any of the other apartments either. We know that most of the neighbors also don't lock their doors at night. For some reason, it sounds as if this person walked up 3 flights of stairs, ignoring all the other open apartments, with the sole intention of coming to ours. Given their attempt at stealth, it's unlikely they were intoxicated either, and it was not just a mistake. Nothing else really came of it though. The police said they'd keep an eye out, and I had to buy a new pair of headphones. It left me thinking, though, about what would have happened had I fully opened my eyes and alerted this person standing over me. Would they have hurt me? Would it have been a total stranger or someone who I'd met before? My friends and I live in the hills somewhere in Northern Ireland. Last year, the four of us were walking along the cliffs by the seaside, arguing about Conor McGregor or something, when my friend pointed out a row of power lines running up and away from the road, out further into the trees. Had we not been thrown out of the pub we normally frequented on the previous night, we probably would have just hit it right back to town for a drink. But given that we had nowhere better to be right now, we decided to try and find out where exactly these power lines led to. The area we were moving through was extremely rugged. The closest thing to a road that led between the trees was these two tracts of flattened ground where vehicles had clearly passed by before. We walked deeper and deeper into the woods, half concentrating on the power lines and half on those wheel marks, just making dull conversation and not really expecting to find anything interesting. That is, until the wheel marks just ended altogether. The power lines wound their way through the tree branches, a kind of awkwardly placed across the limbs. I had never seen this sort of thing before. My buddy wandered a bit deeper into the trees and discovered a 6-foot-tall wire fence circled in a small clearing. Inside this fence was a 2-story stone house, sitting there and looking like a lost heirloom or something. We circled around the fence until we found the actual gate, which was just carelessly hanging open. We walked right up to the front door. Privacy and common sense were not present at the moment. The very first thing I noticed was that there were tons of security cameras mounted outside the home, pointing in all kinds of various directions. I considered what sort of person would go through all the trouble of setting up all these cameras and just leaving the gate wide open. It didn't end there, though. The front door was open as well. The four of us just walked right inside like we owned the place. I hesitated in the entryway, while my friends immediately split up to search around. I went to shut the door behind me when I spotted 4 deadbolts on the inside frame. Suddenly, I got the very strong feeling that we were all trespassing, and whoever owned the place would not be very happy to find us there. My friends found one of those metal detecting wands on the kitchen counter, like the ones you'd see TSA agents using in airports. In a back room, another friend found 2 backup generators. Despite them being there, it was obvious that power had not been working in this place for quite some time. The whole place just smelled musty, like the outside forest had invaded it with its cold, earthly scent. I asked if it was possible this was a secret military base of some kind. One of my friends pointed out, though, that there were no weapon cabinets and there hadn't been any checkpoints outside either. I wanted to leave right now, but the others decided they wanted to search upstairs, which turned out to be one giant room. There was a cot in the corner, but most of the room was occupied by a long table with chairs. There was a flat-screen TV mounted to the wall, which I presume was meant to view footage from the security cameras. While the other guys dug through the drawers looking for anything interesting, one of my friends started fidgeting with the flat screen, like he was going to take it down off the wall and carry it under his arms over the hills the whole way back to his own place. The whole time, though, I was waiting disturbed by the steps, impatient and ready to leave at any moment. I was starting to get the sense that this place may be some very paranoid off-the-grid person's hideaway, and he may have left in a hurry for some reason. This house was very much hidden away. I can't imagine anyone would think to look in this area. I tried to just admire the view from the window and calm down. I could just make out the trees through the window. Then I turned to head back downstairs, and that's when I froze. There were these black marks like ash, staining the carpeted stairs about halfway down. Those definitely had not been there when we'd climbed the stairs earlier. I spoke aloud. Whoa, what the hell? Then the smell hit me. There was a burning fabric scent in the air that washed over me. I immediately panicked and started coughing. I immediately started rushing down the stairs, keeping as close to the sides as I could. I rushed right out the front door without looking back. My friends followed close behind, each of them making remarks about the sudden burning stench in the air. I asked if anyone had tracked in the ash on the stairs, but I already knew the answer. Not only had none of us tracked those marks across the carpet, but none of us had stopped at that halfway point to leave them. I suddenly had the horrific thought that someone else had been in the house with us the whole time. We immediately left the area and headed back to the coastline. Halfway back, we heard a sort of loud roar-like sound from behind us. It could have been an animal, sure, but to me it didn't sound like that. Instead, it sounded like someone's infuriated screams. I decided I didn't really want to be involved at all. A couple of my friends went back a few days later, though, and they told me there was a burned spot directly outside the entrance. When they sifted through the loose soil, they pulled out an entire Ouija board from the dirt. Sometime later, I talked with another friend of mine about it over a couple of beers. He told me he had heard some rumors that there was a group of psychotic people who lived out in those woods. Apparently, they believed in things like ancient curses and demonic possession. They were known to be quite violent towards outsiders. I don't know what was going on in that house that day, but I feel like we were very lucky we didn't encounter whoever owned the home. Also, that we all made it out in one piece without any further incident. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. Before we do anything else, we have to thank our Patreons who support at the credits tier. So thank you to Grace Demarest, Caitlin, Amy Jensen, Deborah Alexander, Stephen Dalberg, Gaddy Family, Jessica GB, Todd Benzales, Lord Rupert Everton, Dirty D, and Brielle Shin. Thank you guys so much for choosing to support the channel, and thank you for every other patron that supports the channel as well. I couldn't continue to do this without your guys' help. If you guys enjoyed the stories in this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. And if you have any stories of your own that you'd like to share for me to read, please be sure to check in the description of the video, where you'll find a link to my social media, mainly my Gmail. Go ahead and send me a message there, and I'll try to read your story as soon as possible. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.